everyone. It's wonderful that you all are joining us, and particularly wonderful to have people from the Greek Jewish community with us. And we've heard some of their stories as we were getting ready for the talk by Marcia. As Jerry said, I haven't changed my name. I'm Mindy Reiser. I'm a sociologist, and I'm also a member of the board of directors of the Jewish Studies Center. Marcia, known to a number of you, and the rest of you will get to know her tonight, Marcia Haddad Ikonomopoulos is museum director of Kehila Kedosha Janina and president of the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry. As a former educator, writer, editor, and translator, she has dedicated her life to telling the story of Greek Jewry. Marcia was honored to be chosen a member of the scholarly committee for review, translation, and microfilming of the Salonika archives at YIVO. YIVO is the Institute for Jewish Research, and she compiled the text and visuals for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's website on the Holocaust of Greek Jewry. Marcia has a lot to share with us, wonderful visuals. And again, I encourage you to put any questions on chat, and we will get to them after Marcia finishes her presentation. So now let's go over to Marcia.
Okay, I would like to welcome you. First of all, thank you to the Jewish Learning Center of Washington, D.C., to Mindy and Jerry, who were very patient with me earlier, working everything out. Thank you to all of you who came today. It was so beautiful seeing so many familiar faces. I want to welcome you to the special presentation on Romaniote Jews, sponsored by the Washington, D.C. Jewish Studies Center and endorsed by Kehila Kedosha Janina. We had originally hoped that this virtual tour would be streaming from our synagogue museum at 280 Broome Street, but since the museum is still closed due to COVID-19, we will pretend that we are there and treat you as actual visitors. First, let's walk through the doors of Kehila Kedosha Janina. This is the only Romaniote synagogue in the Western Hemisphere. We are an historical landmark in the city of New York and on the national and state registries. Our tour always starts in the sanctuary, and this is actually set up to the best that we could do with the limited space we had as a Romaniote synagogue. Normally, the Aron HaKadosh would be on the far eastern wall, and the bima, the raised platform where the Torah is read, would be on the far western wall. We actually have a north-south orientation due to the fact of the shape of the plot of land that was taken over to build the synagogue. The synagogue was built in 1927 by Greek-speaking Jews that lived in the neighborhood. The outside walls of former two-story residential building actually are our present outside walls. They date back to 1901. And then in the basement, with the last part of our restoration, we came across the flooring of two old-style tenements dating back to the Civil War era. This is New York City. Things are built on top of other things. Now to tell the story of Romaniote Jews. If you were here, you'll be sitting down, and we would be telling you this fascinating story.
Excuse me, Marcia, can you go in presentation mode, make it faster, make it larger for the audience?
Oh, okay, I see what you're talking about here. Okay, let me go back and see what I can do here. I gotta find what the presentation, these things are blocking my ability to do anything here because I can't see.
Slideshow, it says slideshow on top. Press slideshow.
Yes, I had pressed that. Slideshow is press, yeah.
And now press setup, I think setup.
No.
I messed you up, sorry. From the current slide. See from the current slide? Press the second from the left. Second from the left. Press that. Oops, doesn't work.
Yeah, I pressed. Okay, okay, beautiful. Okay, good. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Okay, Romaniote Jews have the distinct. Oh, wrong slide. Now Okay, Romaniote Jews have the longest continuous Jewish presence in the European diaspora. The first Jews that entered into what is now Greek soil entered into the port city of Thessaloniki, which is up here, invited by Cassandros, who was the brother-in-law of Alexander the Great, 2,300 years ago. The city was named after Alexander the Great's sister, Thessaly, and it was the victory of Thessaloniki. The term Romaniote Jew was coined in the Eastern Byzantine Roman Empire. There were Jews living on the soil of what is now Greece, who technically would be called Romaniote Jews way before the time of Alexander the Great. There were Jews living along the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean who had come back after the Babylonian exile. And they established synagogues. They were Greek-speaking Jews. Greek was the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean. In Thessaloniki, the Romaniote Greek-speaking Jews built the first synagogue there. It was called Etz Chaim. It doesn't remain now. Those synagogues were destroyed during the Holocaust. But these Byzantine walls date back to a very early period. First they were Venetian, then they were Byzantine, then they were used by the Ottoman Turks. And this is one of the old parts of the city of Thessaloniki that remains after the fire and wasn't destroyed. There were other Jews that entered into Thessaloniki to enlarge the Jewish community there. There were Jews that came from Provence in the south of France, Jews that came from Sicily, Jews that came from Spain, of course, and then there were Ashkenazi Jews that came from northern lands, finding a more hospitable environment to live in the Byzantine Empire, and then afterwards the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Early synagogues were built throughout Greece. This is a picture of the remains of a synagogue on the island of Delos, which is very close to Mykonos. You take a short boat ride over. The distinguishing factor of this synagogue is the chair of Eliyahu Hanavi, which is on the far eastern wall, and that's where the baby boy would sit for circumcision. There were also synagogues built at the foot of the Acropolis and the Agora. The Agora was the commercial center, the market. And the fact that Jews had a synagogue there shows how involved they were in commerce. A distinguishing mark of this synagogue, in addition to the menorah, was a plaque that actually said synagogue. Synagogue is from the Greek, a gathering place. There's also the remains of an old synagogue dating back to the 3rd century of the Common Era on the island of Egina, which is in the process of being restored by an Israeli Greek-Jewish architect, Elias Messinas, and his wife, Yvette. They're covering it, they're protecting it, and they've raised money to restore it. In Veria, which is not too far from Salonika, Thessaloniki, there's a synagogue that sits on the same exact site of a former synagogue that was visited by St. Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, as he went around the Eastern Mediterranean preaching from the bimas of existing synagogues. He was not welcome in Thessaloniki. In fact, it's recorded in the epistles that the Jews there kicked him out on 3 consecutive Shabbats. He went on to Veria, and he talks about the Jews of Veria being high-minded Jews. They welcomed him. The distinguishing factor of Romaniote Jews is the long period of time that they lived under the Byzantine Empire. Byzantium, which unfortunately is rarely studied in this country, we become the victims of the schism between the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church. Byzantium was quite an advanced empire, and it lasted for 1,100 years, longer than both the classical Greek Empire and the Roman Empire together. And Jews lived fairly comfortably in the Byzantine Empire. Were there restrictions? Of course. Were there attempts to persecute? Of course. Nothing was perfect. But if you had a choice of where to live, and you were a wise Jew, you would choose to live in the East rather than in the West that had ghettos and persecutions and blood libel accusations. That did not take place in Byzantium. Here you have Jews play a role as tax collectors, of course, in Byzantium. And there was quite a bit of culture and liturgical production that took place. There, you have here a picture. This here was by Eliezer ben Kalia, who lived from 570 to 640 of the Common Era, and wrote piyutim, liturgical poetry, much of which is still sung today at special holidays. Jews in Byzantium were able to engage in most occupations, with very few exceptions, and this is a physician. Jews became very prominent in medicine in Byzantium, and actually in early universities in the West, especially in a city like Padua. This here is a copy of the Sefer Yosipon, which was written in southern Italy, where there were famous yeshivot. Southern Italy was part of the Byzantine Empire when this was composed in 953. The book contains mention of the Jewish world of the late 9th and early 10th centuries, a survey of Roman antiquities, a brief history of the Maccabean revolt, the war with Rome, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the events of Masada. Sefer Yosipon is the longest and most popular secular text to survive from the Middle Ages. Byzantium was also, by the way, an advanced empire that offered advantages to women, which shows up in our ketubas, where women, it was an early prenup, where any items that were brought into the marriage by the woman were returned to her if the man dared to divorce her or if he died earlier than she did. It was a world where women could attend university, something that was unheard of in the West. The Ottoman Turkish Empire conquered the Byzantine Empire, much in the same way as the Byzantine Empire had conquered the Roman Empire, which had conquered the ancient Hellenistic Greek Empire. The landmass that the Jews lived on remained the same. The only thing that changed was to whom Jews paid their taxes. Relatively speaking, this landmass was a more hospitable environment for Jews to live in. Jews were allowed to practice their religion, build their synagogues, and with few exceptions, engage in most occupations. It's said in the Ottoman Empire, in the city of Salonika, that a Jew can engage in any occupation except that of a Greek Orthodox priest. Throughout the ages, too many things going on. Ioannina became the center of Romaniote Jewry. This is a beautiful postcard picture of Ioannina going back probably into the 17th century, but many of these sites are still there. And the minarets, the mosques that were in the city, it was under the Ottoman Turkish Empire. This is a picture of the marketplace in Ioannina before 1913, and you can see the minaret is still there because it was still part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire until 1913. Ali Pasha was a major figure. He was a despot who ruled over a large area of Epirus from 1740 to 1822. He was killed by his fellow Turks because he became too powerful. He was a brutal murderer. He personally took pride in the fact that he killed over 3,000 people. He was an equal opportunity murderer. He murdered Turks, he murdered Jews, and he murdered Christians. But he was in power for so long that there was a stability in the area and became a center for education and literature. While wars and political upheavals tore up the countryside, Jews, Greek-speaking Jews, Romaniote Jews, made their living, supported their families, served in their country's army, and preserved their distinct culture, language, and traditions. In 1913, this is a painting of the Turkish forces surrendering to the Greek forces in 1913, when Ioannina became part of modern Greece. There was an increase in immigration after 1913 because many Jews in Ioannina didn't know what life would hold for them. They knew what life was under the Muslim Turks. They weren't quite sure what their life would be like under a Christian government. In Salonika, they carried with them the memories of the expulsion from Spain and the Inquisition. In Ioannina, basically the Jews got along well with their Christian counterparts, but they weren't sure what would happen. And laws started to change. These shops had to be closed on Sunday. You know, in this country, we had the blue laws also. It was Christians, their shops would be closed in many cities. But the shops closed on Sunday meant that many Jews felt forced economically to open their shops on Saturday to compete with their Christian competitors. Over half the Jewish community of Ioannina immigrated, mostly to New York City, from 1899 to 1924. As difficult as life was living in cramped tenements, those who chose to leave survived the devastation of World War II and the Holocaust. This picture here is of Isaac Cohn. His wife, Hanula Colchimero, was the brother of Elias Colchimero here. And they were some of the earliest, they came in 1903, some of the earliest immigrants. Here we have a number of early immigrant families. This is the family of Zedek Batino. Those who know Ralphie Batino and Manny Batino, they're here in this picture. This is the Kofana brothers here who were engaged in the textile industry, in the garment industry, as most of the Jews from Ioannina were. And this picture here is of Avram David, who had a shop at 98 Allen Street where he sold kimonos, or what we now would call house dresses, and also bathrobes and nightgowns. I printed the names here because I wanted you to take a look at the names. Most Ioannina Jews, the surnames are male Hebrew first names because they name the way the traditional Jews name. Joseph had a son. Actually, we don't name the way many Ashkenazi name. We honor our mother and father by bestowing their names on our children. So if Joseph had a son and his father's name was Samuel, his son would be Samuel. Joseph Samuel. Joseph ben Samuel. Now, if Samuel had a son and his father's name was Joseph, it would be Samuel ben Joseph. It went back and forth, and the Ottoman Turks were getting crazy because they thought the Jews were changing their name, and actually all they were doing was traditionally naming their children. But what you had is a number of double names. We had Joe Joseph, Sam Samuel, Solomon Solomon. That became very, very popular. We entered World War II in October of 1940. In fact, Oki Day, which is coming up on October 28th, will be the 80th anniversary of Greece answering Mussolini with a resounding Oki, no, when Mussolini said he was going to invade Greece through the Albanian border. This is the Cohen Battalion, made up of Jews from Salonika. This is a picture of Mordecai Frezis, who was a Romaniote Jew born in Chalkis, a colonel, had the distinction of being one of the first high-ranking Greek officers to die on the Albanian front on December 11th, 1940. He's a national hero in Greece. During World War II, Jews served disproportionately to their percentage in the general population. In 1940, there were approximately 76,000 Greek Jews, about 1% of the general population of 7.5 million. Over 13,000 served in the conflicts on the Albanian front. 3,500 would return injured, and 513 would pay the ultimate price by giving their lives for their country, Greece. Among those were 6 young Jewish men from Ioannina: Joseph Raphael, Moses Shemos, Shemos Aktas, David Negrin, Judah Pizzarillo, and Orion Negrin. These pictures were taken by a German paratrooper on the day of the deportation of the Jews of Ioannina. Forgive me here. March 25th, 1944. The Jewish community was rounded up for deportation. Of the 2,000-member community, 1,871 would never return. There would be about 151 that survived, either in hiding in the mountains or survived the concentration camps. The 91% of the community was rounded up, put into open wagons, taken across the mountains. It was very, very cold, snow on the ground that March. It was right before Pesach. They were given a short time to round up their belongings that they could take with them and load it onto open trucks, go into Ladisa, where they were unloaded into the warehouse there, stripped of their jewelry, and then sent on to Auschwitz-Birkenau. This picture over here, can you see the full picture? Because I'm seeing the people over here that are covering the picture. Minda, can you see the whole picture here of the woman? Okay, because I'm seeing the moderators here covering this picture.
Yes.
Okay, can you see the whole picture?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Because this woman is very important. Her name is Fanny Hyam. Her story, I swore if I found out who she was because of that desperate look on her face of desperation, that I would tell her story in the Holocaust. She wound up surviving, and her story is actually part of Holocaust studies in Great Britain now. It's the story of how the Holocaust did not end with the survivors returning. Fanny never went back to Ioannina. She knew her family had perished. She married a Christian man in Athens, raised her children. She had the numbers on her arm, so the family knew she was in the camps. They knew she was Jewish, but she didn't want any of the rest of the world to know. She feared for the safety of her children and her grandchildren, that the same thing would happen to them being Jewish as what had happened to her. This is another picture taken by the German paratrooper. The only survivor from this picture is Ida Levy, who's smiling, ironically, in the picture. The women were looking at their male relatives. And Ida afterwards, she said, I interviewed her, she said, as sad as she was, she didn't want the men in her family to see her sad. The anguish of this little boy who's crying out to his male relatives on the other side. The elderly were rounded up from the senior home in Ioannina. The saddest story is of the children that were lost. You know, at Auschwitz, there were 1.5 million children that were lost in the camps there. This picture, on the other hand, is a picture of our victory, our survival. Life goes on. The 4 women in this photo were all survivors of the concentration camps. And the babies they're holding were the first children born in Ioannina after the war. This is a picture of the Nakhon family. The photo was found in the streets of Ioannina, not far from the family home. The man who does my photoshopping for me, I told him, leave the creases speak volumes. In this picture, Mikis Matsas survived from the camps. This is the father of Michael Matsas here, who survived as a banker from Agrinian and took his family up into the mountains north of Agrinian. And this little girl married into the Ghani family and was living in Egypt at the time. The rest of the family perished. Now at this point, I invite my visitors into the synagogue, which you are now, to stand up as I open the ark and show our precious Torah scrolls. Our Torahs are encased in what are known as tikim in the plural. They are heavy metal and wood cases. According to legend, this was how the Jews who carried their Torah scrolls out of Jerusalem at the destruction of the Second Temple and carried them into the diaspora. Actually, we had a flooding inside of our ark at one time, and the Torahs were protected. The remnant on top were made originally by Jewish craftsmen. Since there were only 30 Jews living in Ioannina now, that is no longer the case, but Ioannina is a major capital of silversmithing in Greece. This is one of our older Torahs, actually our oldest. It dates back to 1750. And you can see here the Mogen Davids, and inside are the initials, Mun, which always puzzled me until Rabbi Gabriel Negrin of Athens visited us, and he said, you know, the Mogen David was used not only by Jews, many non-Jews, including Christians and Muslims, use it as a decorative symbol. So this is to denote the fact that this was a Jewish Mogen David. The scroll is written in traditional Romaniote style, one of only 3 in the world. The other 2 are encased behind glass in museums. Ours is opened and used. That's the best way to preserve a Torah, is to actually use it. Many people ask us, why do we have so many Ner Tamids? These are not Ner Tamids. There's only one Ner Tamid in front of the ark. These are actually memorial lamps. And they have the name of the person with a plea, please say prayers on the anniversary of their passing. As the Romaniotes call it, their adara. And if you go into a Greek Orthodox church in Greece, you'll see the same thing, only with crucifix instead of Mogen Davids on the bottom. So this always brings us to the topic of who stole what from who. In this case, I believe we stole this from the Greek Orthodox Christians, but take something like the eggs at Easter that they dye red, and we use our hamanados that are brown, baked in the oven, brown eggs. I believe they got that tradition from us. We do the same thing with the cracking of the eggs, by the way. Now we invite you upstairs to our museum, which is in the women's gallery. When we are not, when the museum is not open, we close the exhibits. We put curtains in front of them so it preserves its sanctity. The women sit around an opening. They can hear the service below, and we have our exhibits up on the wall. In the museum, there are family utensils that the Jews brought over from Greece. This is as a bumelio plan. You could make bumelios, which are used at it can be used at Hanukkah. We make bumelios. We make at Passover. We make bumelios using masot. It can also be used for keftedes or meatballs. This is actually a Megillah Esther. We have a large collection of these Megillot because it was a wedding present from the groom's family to the bridal couple on their first Purim. This was not a wealthy family. On the other hand, this was an exceedingly wealthy family, beautiful filigree silver encased, and this has been photographed in magazines all over the world. And this is a traditional Romaniote shofar, and you can see the filigree. This is what distinguishes over here. We've had many exhibits in our museum. One of our first exhibits that I worked on was called Our Gang, and it was the story of Greek Jewish men that served in the United States Armed Forces during World War II. This is Isaac Hametz from the Hametz family, and this is Abraham Matzah from the family of Oregon. This is a photo of Ike Matzah, Ike and Blanche Matzah here. It's actually Matzah here. And Eli and B. Zager. This was the time when young couples got engaged. The men were going over to fight. This is Jack Cohn and Manny Asser. And we have Manny's daughter Judith in the audience. Manny was one of my favorite people, such a gentle, precious soul. He died, I believe, shortly before or after his 100th birthday. There were those who sacrificed their lives for our country. Abraham Matzah is buried at Henri Chapelle Military Cemetery. He died at the Battle of the Bulge. And Nissim Addis, his niece, is in the audience. He also died at the Battle of the Bulge. And this is Nissim sitting on a bench at the Allen Street Park, which was a landmark until the city decided to gentrify it and gave us these disgusting benches. But that's a whole other story. Nissim was 19 at the time he perished, as was Abraham. And when we went to Henri Chapelle Military Cemetery, I was accompanied by Rose Addis Ferrara and Jaime Longoria. Jaime's father, Jose, was saved by Abraham Matzah, and Rose read an impassioned letter from her uncle at the opening of the Our Gang exhibit, how he said he didn't need any medals. All he wanted to do was come home to his family. What impressed me with Our Gang exhibit, so many of these young men were either recent immigrants themselves or the sons of recent immigrants. This was the photo that actually inspired the exhibit. And this is my friend Carol Laurie, who's saluting her uncle Arthur Rubenstein. He came from the David family. He was lost, his plane was shut down over the Pacific. His body never recovered. And here we have Herbert Nachman, who was the son of the then president of the Sisterhood of Ioannina. And this is Simon Bacola. And I go to visit Simon's grave because he's buried not too far away from me in Pine Lawn in Long Island. One of my favorite pictures. This is Louis Levy meeting a friend of his from the Lower East Side, Benny Cohn. Louis had a very special story, which I wrote up in a Greek paper called The Personal Odyssey of Louis Levy. He jumped ship. His mother had said to him, if you ever make it to Greece, please go and find out what happened to our family. I haven't heard from them in years. He jumped ship, risking court-martial, made his way hitching rides from British soldiers up to Ioannina, and met Samuel Cohn there, who was related to his family, and heard about the unfortunate roundup of the Jews. And they didn't know at that time. No one had come back, so they didn't know what had actually happened. It would be afterwards that they would find out about the concentration camps. Favorite exhibit of mine was weddings, although if I saw another wedding gown, I was going to scream. But actually, most of the Jews from Greece didn't get married in white. When they came here to the United States, they got white wedding gowns. This is, because I knew Judith Mazza was going to be in the audience, this is Ike and Blanche Mazza, their wedding photo. Then a family exhibit of families. It was called the Quimas, or Los Muestros, our own. And this is a beautiful family photo of matriarch Lulu Moises and 2 of her daughters and 4 of her grandchildren. Lulu's daughter, Mazalto, an arranged marriage was made for her with the first immigrant from the Ioannina community to New York, Zakaria Yamtov. A family member of Zakaria stood in back in Ioannina. The wedding took place, and when Mazalto came over, she was already, quote unquote, a married woman. She traveled with her father, Menachem Moises, and her mother-in-law, I forgot the first name, Esther, I believe, Esther Yamtov. Marvelous way to start out your marriage with a man that you never met before, with your mother-in-law living with you. Marriages were arranged. And when Lulu found out that she could forfeit having to arrange dowries, you couldn't marry a daughter off in Greece without a dowry. And in the United States, you didn't need a dowry. So she brought her other daughters over and married them into prominent Ioannoti families of the time, the Gani family, the Negrin family, the Baruch family. Mazalto her daughter that married Zakaria Yamtov, it was not a happy marriage, but there was no such thing as divorce. When I interviewed the only surviving daughter of Zakaria Yamtov, Estelle Yamtov, shortly before her 100th birthday, she had trouble hearing, she had trouble seeing, but she saved all the dirt for when I was walking out the door. And she said to me, you know, my parents were never happy. And I said to her, Estelle, they had 8 children. She said, that wasn't my mother's doing. This is a picture of the Maza family. And they also married into the Kofino family, so there are a number of Kofinos in this period, in this picture here. And this is one of my favorite photos. This little boy here in the picture is Yosef Eliyahu, who grew up to be a famous poet in Greece and wrote beautiful poetry about his beloved Ioannina. These are his Negrin maternal grandparents and his mother and his father in this picture. Joseph Negrin also is the grandfather of my friend Joel Negrin, and he was in this picture. This picture, when I got it, it was like the size of a postage stamp, and or postage card. And we were able to increase it in size without losing too much resolution. And you can see the details in the garments here, the fur, the work of the dresses. These were all homemade. The women were quite accomplished with the female garments, but quite unaccomplished with the male Western garments. This is a picture of the Matzil family, and this is Bekoraki Matzil, Rabbi Bekoraki Matzil, his wife Amelia, and his 9 children. There was a 10th child that perished, and Saul Matzil, who is on our board of trustees, said that's the reason he was born. His father wanted a son to replace his son's Lord. Bekoraki was a moral, a shokit, and a rabbi. And we inherited his prayer book where he listed over 600 names of boys, Ioannina, Romanaiote Jewish boys that he conducted the circumcision on, both in Greece and when he came here to the United States. And this is the Colchomero family, the family of Leon Colchomero. I know we have some of his descendants that are in on this here. The young man in the back actually is Max Bacola, who came from the only family, the Colchomero, Jesula and Rachel Colchomero had 11 children. 10 of them came to the United States, and only Danula married a Bacola and stayed back in Greece. That family almost totally perished in the Holocaust. And this is one of my favorite photos. This is the Eliezer family that became the Beska family when Metaxas decided that you couldn't have double names like Eliezer. This young woman here in the photo, if you look, she's quite modern looking. She had come to the United States. This was her engagement picture at the age of 19. She sent the picture back home, and the family photoshopped her into the family picture. The only survivor in this picture is Sam Beska, who survived the Holocaust, and we have his sons, very philanthropic to our synagogue on the Lower East Side. The last exhibit that I did is called Memories, the world they left behind, the world they found here. This is the Ioannina at the beginning of the 20th century when most of the immigrants started to come over. A classic rabbi in the street, the marketplace with the auctions moving the produce through the market. This is the world they found here. This is Kehila Kedosha Janina in 1930, about 3 years after it was built. It doesn't look much different now. Shops on the ground floor, still the same now, and the tenements on both sides of the street. You can see here the 2nd Avenue L, which was torn down. And in these pictures, you can see the shops that were under the L along Allen Street. These Jews were very Greek. This is an actual 2 kafanians, coffee shops, on Allen Street. This was the center, and this was the gathering place. These are Greek Jews outside. If they went inside, they would order a Greek coffee and read the local Greek language newspaper, which they could read. There were also Sephardic Spanish-speaking Jews on the Lower East Side, and when they went into their coffee shop, they ordered a Turkish coffee and read the Ladino press that was published on the Lower East Side. This is the picture, Stuart, I was telling you about, taken right across the street from our synagogue, and sitting on the front steps there, getting a little bit of fresh air and socializing. To show you how Greek this community was, you won't find many bar mitzvahs with a Greek flag in the background, but this is the bar mitzvah of Erwin Josephs, the son of the President Joe Josephs, and sitting at the dais, next here's the bar mitzvah boy, here's Joe Joseph, here is the Archbishop of New York, at that time Athena Gordis, and next to him is Rabbi Jesuda Levi, which was the rabbi of Kehila Kedosha Janina. The welcoming of a Torah scroll that the Yohanan family sponsored to bring to New York. And this is one of our artifacts that are very unusual. This is called an Aleph, first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it was an amulet that was created for a young boy, and his name was inscribed, and when he had his Brit Milah, that's when a Jewish boy receives his name, it would have his father's name, his grandfather's name, and his name. Along the top were the angels that protected the child from Lilith, the Ten Commandments, the prayer of the Kohanim, the Shema Israel, and the 67th Psalm inside a menorah. The 67th Psalm is a psalm praising God, and if you're going to ask him for something, it's nice to praise him. What's also interesting in this is the patriarchs and the matriarchs, where normally you only have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here you also have Adam and Moses, and then, of course, their wives. This was made for every Jewish boy. This one was made in Ioannina. They brought the templates over to the United States and for a short period of time created them here. This is our latest exhibit, which has Sidurim, all of them from Ioannina, including two that is written in Judaeo-Greco. Judaeo-Greco is the liturgical language of Romaniote Jews. It's a mixture of Hebrew and Greek. And it's also, Greek was written in Hebrew characters. Here we have the shagayot. These were to decorate the outside of the parochid or the cloth around the Torah scroll. And they were not amulets per se. They would have the name, for instance, in honor of my mother, or a woman of valor, in memory of my father, a great philanthropist. And we have one of the largest collections in the world of these. One of the great things that I love doing in my tours to Jewish Greece, this is how we reinforce the roots of our community and pass them on to the next generation. This is another distinction of Romaniote Jews. They love who they are. They love where they came from. You know, I always say that immigrants, when they pack their suitcases, they put their baggage in, their luggage, they put their clothing. If they had religious artifacts, they put those in. But there was also emotional baggage. And most Ashkenazi Jews carried with them the emotional baggage of persecution, pogroms, of wanting to leave the land and save themselves. Greek-speaking Romaniote Jews, more so even than the Jews who came from Salonika or elsewhere in Greece, brought with them the stories of love for the land that their families were leaving behind, stories of watching the clothing in the lake, stories of the beautiful city of Ioannina. The only way I can describe it is that when Jews are coming in the airport to Israel, most will have tears in their eyes. Romaniote Greek-speaking Jews, when we land in Ioannina and they disembark from the plane, many literally get down and kiss the ground. This is another group. I make up family pictures. Hi, Lois, see you there? I make up family pictures of their families, and they carry them in front of the ark, so that the Jewish community of Ioannina can see their relatives who made that long journey overseas, so that one day they could come back and visit the city of Ioannina. There were many emotional moments. This is the present president, Joseph Eliasov, of the Jewish community of Ioannina. He's now also the mayor of Ioannina, and this is his niece, Linda. We also have fun. We dance on the beach to Greek music, of course. This is my friend Louise and her husband Bernie and their family, who've come with me twice to Greece. One day Bernie will learn how to say Larissa. This is the importance of keeping the flame alive. My dear friend Rose Ashkenazi, who's president of the Sisterhood of Ioannina, brought over her 2 children and her 2 grandchildren and her son-in-law to celebrate a major birthday. And one of the most, I'm going to have to keep myself from crying, one of the most emotional pictures, this is Rachel Serwitz meeting her relative, Stella Meone Cohn. If you remember the picture of the deportation, Stella was the woman with the back to us. Due to DNA testing, we now can make matches of relatives here in the United States with members of the Jewish community in Greece. I'm going to put this up here. Please contact me, get in touch with me. If you're a member of the Ioannina community or the Greek Jewish world, get in touch with me with family photos, family trees, if you want to take part in the DNA research, if you have any questions that we're not able to answer during this presentation. And if I can now get out of this. Okay, I don't know how to end of slideshow.
Click exit.
I don't see where exit is.
Where's Jerry?
Sherry, where are you? How do I get out?
I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay.
You should have, on the top, it should say,
Speaker view. Exit full screen. No. Exit slideshow. Click.
here, touch out.
Oh, here. Okay, this is good. Okay.
Marcia, that concludes your formal presentation. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm going to be taking questions now.
Right, right. Okay, we have a few, and we'll certainly welcome more. Judith Massa asks that you say a bit about the culinary tradition.
Okay, sure. Basically, Jews, any place in the world, take from the non-Jewish world as far as the foods that become part of their culture. I mean, everybody in Eastern Europe ate potato latkes, Jews and non-Jews. Jews from Greece, you know, Sephardic Jews, we've often said, what did they take from Spain? Actually, we're not quite sure. We know with the Romaniote Jews, they ate pretty much the same foods as their Christian, non-Jewish neighbors did, with the exception that they incorporated laws of kashrut. So they wouldn't mix dairy and meat. They would stay away from pork and shellfish. There's an excellent cookbook of the Jews of Greece that Nikos Stavroulakis wrote. We're in the process of putting together a cookbook from Kehila Kedosha Janina, gathering recipes. And there are many distinctive recipes amongst the Romaniote Jews. I mean, if you take the holiday of Hanukkah is coming up soon. We didn't eat potato latkes. We ate mostly latkes made from leeks or prasino, keftet as we call them. We also didn't eat hamantash. We ate the matia to chamin, the eyes of chamin, which was made in like a bread with eggs, you know, the hard-boiled eggs as the eyes. My family was Sephardic, so we ate many Sephardic dishes. And Purim was the big holiday for children. Children would get dressed up in costumes, and they would be given treats. We did not receive gifts at Hanukkah. We received gifts at Purim. We were not in competition with the Christian world back in Greece. there was, at least before 1913, so you didn't have to compete with the Christmas tree and the Christmas presents. There were no Hanukkah bushes. We had the holiday for children was put in, and it still is in many parts of the Sephardic world.
Okay, some people were interested in the relationship of the Romaniote Jews to Hanukkah. You talked a little bit about it right now, but say some more.
Okay. If you came to our synagogue and see the play that our children put on for Hanukkah, the story that's told is very different and yet is historically accurate. At the time of Hanukkah, the Maccabean revolt, they were under the Roman Empire. So our children do not talk about being persecuted by the Greeks forcing them to worship idols in their temple. It's the Romans that were doing it. And that's how they interpret that story. And it's actually more historically correct.
Okay. In terms of the Jews of Rhodes, there's interest in learning their connection, if any, to the Romaniote Jews.
Okay. At one time, all the Jews throughout Greece were Romaniote Jews until the influx of Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and Jews from places like Sicily. Actually, Rhodes has a very interesting history because it wasn't until 1522 that Jews that had been affected by the expulsion order from Spain actually came into Rhodes, because Rhodes was under the Knights of St. John until the Ottoman Turks won over the city in 1522, and it was Sultan Suleiman that invited the Jews into Rhodes to settle there. The Jews that had lived there before mostly left because of wars that were going on or persecutions. So the island was fairly cleansed of Jews. The Crusader Knights were not very hospitable. The Ottoman Turks were much more hospitable. By the way, my nonna, my grandmother, had a picture in the house of Suleiman the Magnificent. She thought his name was Solomon, which it probably, Suleiman is Arabic for Solomon, but he was considered a great savior of the Jews. My family didn't come from Rhodes, by the way.
Okay, there's some interest in the diaspora beyond New York. Betty Sinowitz asks if any of the Romaniote Jews emigrated to Mexico or other places in South America.
Not really. There were many Sephardic Jews, that family that went to Venezuela. There were Jews actually from the island of Corfu that wound up in Argentina. I actually went there a number of years ago to bring back a magnificent Megillah Esther that dates back about 400 years ago, and the family wouldn't ship it, so I was forced to go to Argentina, Buenos Aires, to pick it up. The sacrifices one must make. No, it wasn't, they went, Romaniote Jews went elsewhere in the diaspora. There was a great movement, Zionist movement in Greece. In fact, the street that now where the Jewish Community Center is located, which is named after the poet Joseph Elia, was named after Max Norton, who was a contemporary of Herzl. And so there was a Zionist movement. Many Jews went there not only to die, which was very traditional, but also to settle there. So there was an early Greek Jewish community, Romaniote, in Eretz Israel. There were also those that went to France because there were opportunities for Jews there. Members of the Gani family went there. There were Jews that went into Italy, primarily from the island of Corfu, because there was a great Italian influence. And they went into Trieste, mostly, in northern Italy. England. We have Greek Jews in England. There was an exhibit at the Jewish Museum of Manchester recently on Sephardic Jews, but there were also Romaniote Jews that went there. In fact, I'm working on a family tree from a Rebecca Bacola, who came to Manchester in the early part of the 20th century.
Okay. we have an interesting question from Beryl Newman about Romaniote Jews and Yiddish. How did that play out?
It didn't. We didn't speak any Yiddish. I can remember growing up, and I grew up in Brooklyn, and where we had a very close community of Sephardic Jews over in basically East New York. I became friends with Ashkenazi Jews when I went to school. And I can remember meeting the mother of the household, and she would be speaking Yiddish to me. And when she found out that I couldn't speak Yiddish, I could read her lips. She said, she's not Jewish, you know? That was the feeling, because we didn't speak Yiddish, neither the Romaniote nor the Sephardic Jews. How could we be Jewish without speaking Yiddish?
Given how prevalent Yiddish was in New York City when the people came in the early 20th century, I guess they had to find a different way of communicating. Because
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned that. Actually, the Rabbi David de Solapool came down to the Lower East Side to dedicate synagogues of Balkan Jews, ours included. And we were put under the greater Sephardic umbrella to give us more power, powers in numbers. Because we were really, both Romaniote and Sephardic Jews were being denied services from many Jewish agencies that did not think that these people were Jewish because they didn't speak Yiddish. How could you be Jewish if you're speaking Greek or Spanish, So it was not a comfortable situation. And I think it's ironically, one of the reasons that we survived. When we opened our doors in 1927, we were the 400th synagogue on the Lower East Side, south of Houston. There were a good 200-300 between Houston and East 14th Street. Most of those are all gone. And we're still there. Simply put, there was no one for us to merge with. There were no other Greek-speaking synagogues in the area. And this community was stubborn. They weren't going to give up what they considered their very precious traditions. So those who didn't think we were Jewish, they're not even there anymore. And we're still there.
All right. Some questions again about language. You may have touched this, but someone wants to know about the origin of the term Romaniote. And someone also wants to know if there's a direct tracing to the 12 tribes of Israel and the Romaniote Jews.
That's DNA can only go back so far. I received an invitation a number of years ago to the descendants of King David. Of course, I had to pay $1,000 for a plate at the dinner there, but a beautiful, beautiful invitation. I don't know any people around who have King David's DNA to prove who's who. We certainly don't know. There's legends about certain of the tribes. There's even a legend in Greece that in Sparta, that they came from the tribe of Dan because that was a warrior tribe. So there's many legends about that, but I don't know. Generally, most Jews that lived with the split up after the Assyrian exile, Jews that were living in Judea, most of them came from the tribe of Benjamin, and then, of course, you had Levi. But that's further than that, I don't think many people can prove anything. Romaniote is a name that was given to Jews that lived in the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire. They were citizens of Rome. And they were called that. They were called Romans. And in their dialect, it was Romaniote. It's somebody put up there before, Zigazuk. I think it was Rose Addis who put that up. Where the Ashkenazi Jews did not believe that we were Jewish, we had our little nicknames for them. Amongst the Romaniotes, they called them Zigazuks. It's nothing derogatory. They were imitating the Yiddish they heard, as Zigazin, Zigazuk, so they called them Zigazuks. Now, amongst the Sephardim, we called them Vus, because all we heard was Vus, so we called them Vus. But, I mean, this was, the inability to communicate.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Somebody asks about assimilation. of Romaniote Jews. I suppose that means marrying people who were not Jewish, although assimilation can mean many things.
Yeah, I mean, actually, first generation Romaniote Jews, there were get-togethers to aid them in marrying others from the Romaniote Jewish community, which happens throughout the Jewish world. The Landsman clubs, where they would, meet to meet others that were similar to them. The early marrying were Romaniote Jews marrying Sephardim. That was considered a mixed marriage. And then Ashkenazi, which was considered a shanda, But we probably have the same statistics of Jews marrying non-Jews as any other Jewish community does. Technically, Romaniote Jews and Sephardic Jews are Orthodox. There was never a reform movement in Greece. The conservative movement, of course, was an invention here in the United States for the most part. So we're technically Orthodox. Our policy at Kehila Kedosha Janina, yes, women worship separate from men. We feel we're closer to God up in the balcony. And as far as kashrut, what you do in the privacy of your own home is your own business, but anything that comes into our synagogue must be kosher. As far as the Shabbat, most of us do not have the luxury of not driving on the Shabbat. We made the decision a long time ago. It's more important for us to have the service. God will forgive us if we have to drive in to have the service. We've been able to keep our synagogue open for 90 years now, and we're proud of that, and we will continue with the future.
I hope so. In terms of studying Hebrew at Hebrew day school or after school, does the synagogue sponsor that?
We're going to start doing that, by the way. It's on our agenda. There was a Jewish school very early on. In fact, the second door that leads down actually leads down to the basement area. That's where the Jewish school was. It only lasted for a couple of years. And then they opened the Talmud Torah around the corner on Eldred Street. And that's where the young boys went to study for their bar mitzvah. And Jewish education really dropped off for the women.
Okay, let me just go back a little bit and ask about relations between the Romaniote Jews and the Muslim community and the imams and the rabbis during the Ottoman control of their part of the world.
Okay, there was really, things change. Boy, have they ever changed. For a long period of time, Jews lived a very blessed existence in the Muslim world. My family can date their ancestry back to Muslim Spain. Then they came into Ottoman Turkish Salonika. My mother was born in Haifa when it was still part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and my father was born in the southern part of Turkey when it was, of course, part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. He was born there. No, actually, I think it was modern Turkey at the time. But for the most part, the Muslims considered non-Jews part of a Amulet. What it meant, and this was all non-Jews, whether they be Christian or Jewish, they paid an extra head tax, and it was the responsibility of the leader of the religious community to collect those taxes. So the Ottoman Turks put in a haram bashi, or a head rabbi, which was completely alien to Jews, where the Greek Orthodox Church had the patriarch or the archbishop. Same thing with the Armenians. We did not have a head rabbi. In fact, the Jews pleaded with the Ottoman Turks not to have that responsibility invested in just one individual, because it was meant the collection of taxes. They wanted it to take place on a local level. But we lived very harmoniously with the Muslims for a long period of time. It was the Christian world that really brought persecution in Spain, the expulsion order, the Inquisition. It's a tough subject, but the Muslims were not a problem until recently. And actually, we bear the scars now. I don't know how many people realize this, but many many of the non-Jewish rhetoric that comes from the Muslim world dates back to the Crusades, where they felt the Crusaders came in, slaughtered Muslim population, and ever since then, there was almost like a vindictive nature. We weren't the ones that were slaughtering them. It was the Christian Crusaders, but we very often bear the brunt of that. Although in early Muslim religion, there definitely were anti-Jewish tropes from the time of Mecca, and that's a complicated subject there. But we lived harmoniously in a Muslim world.
Jerry, we have about 5 minutes. Maybe we can go a little further in time. I think it would be nice if some of the people in our 109 people on this call still wanted to ask any questions. If you raise your hand and I can see you, I can call on you.
I'm seeing someone here who asked a question about the oral history of the Jews arriving on a slave ship. I believe someone asked that question. Okay. Yeah. I used to poo-poo that question because if you're familiar with the landscape of where Ioannina is, it's not close to the coast. And if they landed off the coast of Greece, they'd have to be mountain goats to make it up to Ioannina. And then I met an excellent man who is an Albanian marine archaeologist, and he told me about a series of slave ships that they found from the Roman Empire that had crashed in the body of water between the southern part of Albania and the island of Corfu, which led credence to that myth, because then they could have walked on shore and just walked across to Ioannina. That wouldn't have been a short walk, but it would have been a straight walk. They wouldn't have had to climb over mountains. The earliest documentation of Jews in Ioannina is from the 8th century. That denotes a Jew who was in charge of being the caretaker in a church there. But considering that Ioannina was on a major trade route, the Via Appia went into the Via Ergatia, and that was a route that went from Ioannina up to Kastoria, up to Salonika, and then east into the silk trade. So considering that, I'm sure there was a very early settlement of Jews in Ioannina. We just don't have any official documentation.
Just a question about the roles of Jews as people in Ioannina. Were there artisans who did various works of art, crafts? Is there a tradition there?
Yeah, well, there was the silversmiths, of course. There were many Jewish silversmiths, and most of the silver ornaments in the synagogue, very decorative, were made by them. There was also, of course, the creation of the dialects,
yes,
which were, those were works of art too. Most of the Jewish occupations in Ioannina were merchants. They had small family-owned shops, mostly engaged in trade with textiles, needles, threads, buttons, sundries such as that, but family-owned businesses. In the memorial book that we put out for the Jewish community of Ioannina, out of a community number of the victims, numbering 1,851, there were only 4 professionals. There was one rabbi, there was a doctor, and there was a woman who was a teacher, and then another man who was a teacher. So that's a very small percentage of educated people. They were mostly merchants. But what always amazed me with this community is coming over here, to the Kochemero family. Jesula and Rachel had practically no education. Jesula probably had just had enough to keep his books. Rachel never had a day of education at all. And yet they produced doctors, lawyers, professors, architects, and not only among the men, but also the women. So it was in the genes. It just needed a place where they could develop.
Let's end with a question about the wonderful tradition of the olive. Who is creating the olives these days? And I hope that is a vibrant and continuing tradition.
It is. We now have, we had a rabbi from Florence who made up a template for us that we can reproduce, and then a rabbi inserts the child's name. We have now extended this tradition to girl babies also. So yes, we have beautiful Alefs that we sell. If you want, get in touch with us. You have my email there. I'll show you a sample of them. And we've had a number of people who have bought them. We have the means to recreate them.